And hello everyone from the folks at Health Watch Oklahoma. We are glad you're with us. We have got three quarters of the Fab Four tonight. So happy you're with us. Whether you're on News 9, News on 6, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, or wherever Ryan Wilton has a stream going, we're there tonight. And we're so grateful. And let me introduce the gang. It's Dr. Larry Bookman, Dr. David Chansone, Dr. John Armitage, who have you got yourself muted up, Dr. Armitage, or do I have you muted? Okay, we've got it together now. So there's a lot of great topics tonight. All I want to say is at some point in the next few minutes, we're going to talk about what happens if you get your COVID views sideways. You go from that, like straight ahead, steely eyed, 7-1, home field advantage, everything's great, to this, and this is what happens. And by the way, I'm a Packer shareholder, and Dr. Chanson's team whooped the dog out of us the first game of the season.
Okay? Couldn't kick the sense out of him, I guess. I don't know about that.
And then we lost to Kansas City yesterday. We're at the Sooner taxi squad would beat Kansas City yesterday. But there was one player who didn't show up for the Packers. I'm bitter, and you all know that. But Dr. Bookman, there's a lot of other news. We're going to get to the Aaron Rodgers stuff here in a little bit. But you've got a lot of things that are really important. That's important because there are a lot of people being misled by this. But nonetheless, you've got some other great topics today. By the way, I'll be behind the scenes, and I would like to get a lot of questions this evening. So you have a chance to do that. Send them in. I'll send them on to the doctors. Dr. Bookman, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Scott. I'm glad that Dr. Armitage was able to join. I know he had a prior meeting and obligation. I was afraid we had gone from the fearsome foursome to the gruesome twosome. So glad you're here. You bring it real life. I want to start off before we get to the Aaron Rodgers, let's talk about some of the new things that have happened this last week with new antivirals. As we know, Pfizer has now come up with a pill that they say is 89% effective against hospitalization and death. Merck has a pill, not quite as effective, but they've already asked for emergency use authorization. Hadn't been a lot of publicity, a lot of talk. Everybody's, from certainly the government standpoint and the NIH, saying, oh, we need to be vaccinated, which is true. But let's start off talking about these new antivirals. How do they work? How's it going to work with using monoclonal antibodies? And what can people sort of expect for the future? Because this is not that far off in the future. John, you want to start?
Well, I just say I wish they'd come up with the antivirals before the vaccine, because then we wouldn't have any of this controversy. Everybody do what we're used to doing in America, which is get sick and take a drug for it. But I do think, it should be on people's radar. I think it will change the dynamic. Unfortunately, they're not approved yet, so we're not starting to get the real world experience beyond the clinical trials, which is unfortunate, because I do see this as becoming a very large part of the way people conceive of care. It is premature. They're not here yet. You can't. I think it's important to know vaccines are the best way forward at this moment. But I do think we need to start understanding the best use of these drugs. Again, this comes down to something we've talked about a lot on this show, which is identifying the different subpopulations and trying to determine combination therapies for those subpopulations, as well as straight up therapies. But somebody who's naive and not been infected is different from somebody who's been infected, is different from somebody who's been vaccinated, is potentially different from somebody who has gotten a booster. And laid on all that is the wonderful variability of gender, age, racial background. So again, we're just adding more variables in that we need to understand, and we need to have a roadmap to understanding. That's my long take on that.
Well, and that's what's confusing people. People are very confused. Are Are these pills going to be the same as the vaccine? And they're not. It's for people who have tested positive. And with the Pfizer, they're saying within 72 hours of testing positive or being symptomatic. Those aren't necessarily the same. So, David, can you give us a roadmap of how you expect?
So here was the study they did. They did the study on this. It's a protease inhibitor, which is an older antiviral science. It's very exciting. For example, the hepatitis C drugs that are so effective nowadays are all protease inhibitors. Protease inhibitors were the ones that changed the tide of the HIV epidemic. You remember when David Ho won Times Man of the Year? That was for developing the protease inhibitors. So protease inhibitors are a really exciting part of antiviral science. The study was done. They originally wanted to recruit 3,000 people. They ended up recruiting about 1,900 to two arms, 1-to-1. You had to have at least one underlying condition or characteristic that put you at risk for severe disease. No one was in the hospital. These are all mild or moderate. And here's, I think, the most important part of this thing. You had to be started on the drug within 3 days of the onset of symptoms. It is important to remember with any antiviral that I have ever used, they didn't, except for maybe HIV and hepatitis C, it doesn't work unless you start it really, really early. So this whole idea of I was feeling fine and then I got worse, then I went to the doctor, it's not going to work. That being said, they stopped it early because the data was so promising. 0 deaths in the treatment arm, 10 deaths in the placebo arm. 89% efficacy, like you said. It's a twice-a-day drug for 5 days. I think medications like this do not trump vaccines. I don't think they ever have. I don't think they ever will. The influenza drug, for example, the first one that was approved is a drug called oseltamivir. And it is not very good. Actually, a lot of people are still mad that it went through the FDA, that it was able to get approved. And it was used very inappropriately. It was used for people who never had a diagnosis of flu, just had cold-type symptoms. It was used after people had been sick for a week and a half. And what ended up happening, we ended up having resistance to it. So if you're going to use a drug, you have to use it appropriately. That's always been the rule. And people need to recognize that. Well, prescribers need to recognize that, and let's hope that they do. If it comes out on an EUA, I suspect the requirements will be pretty stringent. It certainly will come out on an EUA before it comes out on a full sort of blanket. And I can tell you that the requirements are pretty stringent for EUA. You can't putz around with that. And so that'll help a little bit. I think that any weapon that we can come up with to fight COVID is a good thing. I said at the beginning, I still think vaccines are the most important thing here. You know, it'll be fascinating. All those people who said they don't trust Pfizer for the vaccine, how many will trust them for the pill?
I think that's going to be real interesting. You know, the other question.
This is where you want to put the tracker, by the way, is in the new Paxlovid. This is where you're going to put the tracker.
You know, I haven't even seen if it gets approved. We're going to assume it will, but if it does, the vaccines are free.
Right.
People can't complain about the cost of the vaccine. These
point.
pills aren't going to be free.
I don't know that they will. I don't know that the federal government's going to buy a bunch more stuff like this. At some point in time, it's like, no, you got free vaccines. You know, now I don't know in the study. There has not been a study. All I'm reading is kind of what I'm seeing on the Pfizer site, where they have some nice stuff about their phase 2 and 3 interim analyses and the safety data that they presented and everything like that. Very few adverse events. But what I don't know is ritonavir? Certainly it's not ritonavir. Anyway, what I don't know is whether or not the government's going to pay for it. I agree with you. In the past, if it's on an EUA, though, I don't know that they can charge the insurance. Is it just going to be out of pocket? I don't know.
Yeah, don't know.
That's a great question because, I mean, there's one monoclonal antibody that the government didn't buy. I don't know if you could have gotten the vaccine to be in the study. That's something that we'll have to see when they put out the full data. Or do they just – I hope they didn't. I hope they took all comers who were testing positive for it. I think that would be appropriate. I'll be curious to see. You know, here's the deal. I'm talking to the audience, not to you two, of course. When there are studies, we have to look at everything. When we critically evaluate a study, we want to see were the treatment groups the same? Were they truly randomized? Because even by chance, you can have some differences. You got to look at the way the study was designed, all of that kind of stuff. This data is exciting, but it is provided by the company that is trying to sell it. So, I mean, it's important that science continues to go through the cadence of science and figure out whether or not this is really something. But I think it's very, very exciting.
I would hope that the government does pay for this. I think, if they don't, it's probably going to be even more politicized, and to and fro of,
good point.
Making decisions for the public, skewing decisions in a way. So I'm a little bit surprised, I guess, when this came out, I'd even somewhat forgotten about the emerging antiviral arm. And then I maybe wonder why it's not been more politicized. Because this seems like, sadly, it might end up as a wedge kind of tool for those who don't want the vaccine and things like that. So I'm actually, it kind of struck me as a little bit odd that we haven't seen. I'm happy, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting to any of our viewers to go out there and start protesting or anything about availability of antivirals. But again, I see the access has been one of the really good things, but I know it's cost us a lot, but deaths cost a lot. ICU visits cost a lot. But I think our approach to the medical access on COVID treatments and vaccines has been one of the stronger elements of our response in this crisis. And I hope there aren't artificial or political limits that are going to be applied. That seems the wrong direction for sure.
Well, in talking about the vaccines, let's talk also about the boosters, because we know that the Pfizer booster is now 5 to 11-year-olds, and it's gotten emergency use authorization. But interesting, I read a couple of days ago, Moderna, which was trying for 12 to 17, it hadn't even gotten down to the 5-year-olds yet. The FDA did not approve it and actually delayed any decision till January. And I think I was talking with David earlier. I think this shows that the process is working. People who think that all this is just being pushed through the FDA and the CDC without any thought, it's not. Moderna didn't get the approval they were looking for and puts them way behind Pfizer and the 8-ball. So what do y'all think about the Moderna being delayed?
Again, I think all tools are good tools, but I'm a fan of science and I'm a fan of doing the math. I think the FDA vaccine committees have done a really good job. It's pretty clear that occasionally the CDC and them have been at loggerheads. It's happened with that sort of first indication. Remember when they voted against the first responders and people with close contacts who weren't at high risk of developing severe disease? The CDC went ahead and recommended, but FDA didn't. But bottom line is, I think for the most part, they're looking at that. I'm fascinated to know, though, what the problem was. My suspicion is it's probably not a substantive thing. I think the Moderna vaccine is a good vaccine. We've shown that it maybe is even a little bit better than Pfizer in terms of sustained responses. You haven't heard about any awful things coming out of the studies. My suspicion is this is more kind of a making sure that your briefs are right before you give them to the judge kind of deal. And I was telling you earlier, Larry, what I meant when I said that I think Pfizer just shows where their R&D department is so good is every step of the way they have been ahead of Moderna in terms of getting these things approved. And I think that there's probably one big, huge building on the Pfizer campus that is just for figuring out how to do this. Moderna is still a new company. They don't know how to wrangle all of those machinations, the subtleties that go through trying to get stuff FDA approved. And Pfizer, quite frankly, is probably just better at it. So I think it's kind of like, you have two football teams that are evenly matched athletically. Which one has the better coach? Maybe that's the difference in the game. I think you're seeing that a little bit. But I think the Moderna is a sound vaccine. I'd be curious to see if they say anything about why they're kind of slow playing it. My suspicion is, again, it's a data issue. There was some rumblings in the lay press about some of the Pfizer data integrity and a whistleblower in Texas or something like that. I don't know if you guys saw that at all or not. I think it's all poo-poo. I don't really think it's anything. But again, I agree with you 100%, Larry. We want them to do their due diligence. We want them to look at everything, and there's a reason things need to be submitted on Form A and not Form B, and not just freehand. And I hope that that's what's going on here.
And I would just say that with vaccines, we're kind of in a little bit of a mature stage where, it's not that we're short of supply. If you remember, if you dial back to the beginning of the calendar year, it was all about, did we have enough doses, and could we get them to market quick enough, and what was the storage conditions? We've moved so far along from there, which is really positive. It gives us a little bit more flexibility. I think now we've got choices and we'll have increasing choices, and hopefully we'll start to understand what really is the best vaccine for which population. It might be a patchwork. It might be one size fits some, and another vaccine fits others. So we're kind of getting into a maturing phase around certainly vaccines. I can't say we're probably maturing in terms of the other treatments particularly, but it takes some of the intensity and the time frame off. If you have some alternatives, you have some supply. So again, great that we're able to use that time to consider data, make sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. The one thing that's interesting to me about the vaccine story is now we're sort of hearing I think the president said everybody should get a booster, or by Christmas, everybody should get a booster. To me, that's again, we're missing some of the opportunity to start to subdivide. I don't think everybody's probably going to be on the same booster regime. That doesn't make sense to me. That they're different risk populations. They're different. We know age is a huge player in the way this disease manifests itself. So we may end up with a one-size-fits-all recommendation, but right now I think it's a bit premature to go out and say everybody get a booster. That just seems cart before the horse. And again, we're a long time. We're now over. If you look at the trials, we're well over a year through those trials. We should have some. We should have some emerging data around subsets and boosters, and at least starting to have the conversation. And I haven't seen a lot of that. I hope we see more of it to come. Again, I think the simplistic, it starts to get resistance. We've got a pretty sophisticated audience right now that's going to pick apart all the lack of sophistication. You invite criticism if you don't do some diligence around shaping an argument that looks like a lot of time and thought has gone into it. And if you do a one-size-fits-all booster recommendation, you're baiting the critics.
Well, and that is a great segue right into Mr. Aaron Rodgers, who, when asked if, he had been vaccinated, he went, yeah, I'm immunized. Well, he ought to be a politician rather than a football player, because as it turns out, he wasn't vaccinated. And then after turning positive, went straight to Dr. Chansom's favorite drug, ivermectin. And that's what he took. I'm amazed. I mean, this is a man who I had respect for his intelligence, and he was an individual, but you had to respect some of that. I don't know if you all saw Terry Bradshaw on Fox.
Loved it. Good for you, Terry. Good Oklahoman right there.
Just ripped Aaron Rodgers for being a liar. Yeah. Go ahead, David.
I mean, I am just so over these coddled athletes getting a pass on being able to do this stuff. We heard it with Andrew Wiggins at Golden State. We heard it with Kyrie. We're still hearing it with Kyrie Irving. Well, you haven't heard anything from Kyrie Irving because he's not playing. They are given all of this stage and all of this attention. And, I can promise you, every single person in the equipment room at the Green Bay Packers Stadium is vaccinated because they had to be. Every single ticket taker, every single person that works in the back office processing his humongous checks has had to be vaccinated, or they couldn't keep their job. And I'm just kind of over these guys and girls who feel like, they are different than everybody. And vaccines are just the tip of the iceberg on a lot of this stuff. What he did, and here's the worst part of what he did. At least like Kirk Cousins owned it. I'm not getting vaccinated, whatever. All right, cut my contracts out, At least Kyrie Irving owned it, I guess, in that regard. Andrew Wiggins made a good business decision. I'll get the shot if it means I'm not going to make $20 million this year. But Aaron Rodgers was a smug jerk. That's it. He was a smug jerk. And we got up there and they said, "Are you vaccinated?" He didn't say, "Yeah." He said, "I'm immunized." He just said that. Now, let's look at the immunization strategy he pursued. He went to a naturopath who gave him a certain series of massages and some sort of tincture of wombat piss or something like that to get his antibody levels up, and then tried to submit that to the medical crew who oversees the NFL's exemption protocols, and try to use that as evidence that he was effectively immunized or whatever. Unbelievable. If I sat there and I started talking on this show about how to best attack the cover 2 defense, he would tell me to stay in my lane. And I'm telling him the same thing. Not that he's going to see this show. I think we may think a little bit too much about viewership. But if Anthony Fauci got up there and started telling Aaron Rodgers how to attack the cover 2 defense, he would tell him to shut the hell up and sit down, pay for his ticket, get another beer, exactly, and go enjoy the show. I'm done with him. I mean, I saw some Wisconsin health system cut him. I hope he loses some more. I mean, I'm gonna have, it's just, and it's not even because he didn't get the vaccine. That's fine if you don't want to get the vaccine. I mean, it's not fine. I don't agree with it, especially not people who have this humongous platform and all this power, like Nicki Minaj, and now Carrie Underwood's husband is backing up Aaron Rodgers, and all of this stuff. I'm over it. You guys don't know what the hell you're talking about. And I'll say it to your face. I don't care. I don't care if you are an NFL quarterback. I'm going to tell you, shut up, because you don't know what you're talking about. And the fact that he was just so smug about it, I think, is what bothers me the most. I don't know if anybody saw Saturday Night Live this weekend, but Pete Davidson had it perfect. He said, "I'm 7-1 of my close contacts. Only one ended up in the hospital." Maybe
now 7-2.
Yeah, and that's what bothered me the most. He went to team meetings with no mask. Yeah. He went into public areas with no mask, knowing he was not vaccinated, and giving the impression that he was until he tested positive.
It's just because. But the fact of the matter is, he was giving the impression that he was, but he thinks he's smarter than everybody else because he went to some shaman out there in California and did all of this stuff, and he's like, "Oh, you guys don't." Yeah. You're right, Aaron. The rest of us don't have a clue what we're talking about. We're just idiots that have been doing this for the last 2 years, watching jerks like you set us back another 1 or 2% in the fight against COVID. Thank you, buddy. Thanks a lot. Way to show some support for your team. And luckily they did lose again yesterday. Unfortunately, they did lose again.
And looked terrible.
I really wish Jordan Love would have kicked some butt, but unfortunately he didn't. And I don't know. But you know what? It's okay. He's a great athlete. You know what that all athletes have to do? Get that hat off your head, Scott. I come up there to LA and
I just thought I'd join in the circus. Okay. Because
it's just unbelievable. And but he'll win a couple of games and everybody will kind of forget about it. Just like, I'm not going to get into other athletes that we've kind of forgotten about, but they commit these egregious sort of errors, and then but he won last night. He's the NFL MVP.
Yeah, this is where winning overtakes everything else, including what should be common sense by the owners. Sit his butt down.
For those folks who are like a shareholder like me, who make the trip up there to see this, right? This is not only putting him at risk. He's put people in the NFL's looking at the protocols. So you guys remember what happened in New England a few years ago when they disregarded the rules? They lost draft picks.
Yeah.
And what happened to Tom Brady? He was it 4 to 6 games he was suspended?
Six games. Six
Destroyed his career.
Oh, I know. It's so sad.
Yeah, he only got.
Poor guy.
He only won the Super Bowl last year.
Leave it to Dr. Armitage to completely stand everything on its head. But here's the other thing. I don't know. I haven't seen much news this week and been traveling, but I got to tell you that if he has symptoms, I don't know if he's going to play this weekend. But number two, how many people? You know, the third team quarterback was sick. Week before, the defensive coordinator was sick and couldn't attend. The defense looked great, by the way, yesterday. The whole point is that this has put people at risk. And
absolutely,
the program could be at risk. We could lose draft picks. This was an incredibly bad decision. And, and we had home field advantage. Not sold up, but, you know, it looked like that was going to happen. This is Shakespearean from the week before we won the game against Arizona to this. And all because I really enjoyed the Dr. Chanson's.
He wanted to listen to Joe Rogan instead of these other. I mean, these people are given millions of dollars for this tremendous platform, and they continue to use it to do these kind of detrimental things. It's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. And I don't think you would have seen this 40 or 50 years ago. It's just disgusting.
So I'm going to throw a few counterfactuals out there to antagonize folks. You know, one of the things that strikes me is, as we've been dealing with the mandate, the OSHA, the mandate and the injunctions and all that, is, you know, potentially if we were writing laws and our Congress were working correctly and there were hearings and, you know, people had to go and vote on this, our elected officials, to try and make policies, we would have such a different type of debate. We'd have a controlled debate where presumably the people at the microphone were experts, and we'd have an elevated conversation, maybe even touching on statistics and a few other things. But because policy is in a vacuum where it's one executive decree after another, or one recommendation from a government agency that is not necessarily transparent to the public, then we're in a situation where there's a vacuum, and Aaron Rodgers is a focal point for it. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a symptom of our broken decision making. And the thing I would add is if we were having a robust kind of public policy debate through the channels that were designed maybe better for this, maybe we could throw in a discussion right now about what to do about the anti-vaxxers for the other vaccinations, because it seems kind of weird that we're coming after this national, well, not weird. Maybe it's an opportunity. We're coming after this pandemic with a certain set of guidelines or hoped for guidelines that we've given a pass to known infectious agents that don't have the kind of political overlay. So it would be an opportunity to use measles, mumps, rubella, that polio and everything else as a chance to say, you know, get in the boat. You know, there is a common boat here. We think as a society that we want to pass policies and pass laws, not executive orders or bureaucratic orders, to get us all in line with what is good science presented by good scientists and epidemiologists. It just seems that the vacuum, we have an existing tool that could help us, and it's totally silent. I haven't heard of congressional hearings on vaccines or anything. Maybe I'm missing it. Maybe HHS is. Boy,
but I mean, the way
Thursday.
But the way you see some of these guys come at, I mean, you know, I'll just take the very acrimonious debates between Rand Paul and Anthony Fauci. I mean, would those hearings get anything accomplished, John? I mean, hasn't the discourse just become so uncivilized that it might be that we have to put up with Aaron Rodgers as the voice of whatever? Well,
I think if we put them on the hot seat, that like they're supposed to be creating laws for us. You know, they get the ability to sit there and not do their job, not create, whether it's immigration policy or any other policy. They've defaulted to letting other people make decisions while they grandstand. What if we force them to do their job, which is come up with a policy, argue it out, And by the way, the clock is ticking. The longer you people show that you're incompetent to make decisions that are of a national scale and should not be devolved in some instances, get out there and, the OSHA thing. That's not a policy that needs to come through an agency. That's a significant issue for the way we conduct ourselves as a giant United States team of the public. So let's get out there and do what you're paid to do. Do what we elected you to do. Have the arguments. If you want to devolve into shouting matches, the chairman will hopefully have a device. I don't know Congress very well, but it'd be great if they could usher them out and put them in the timeout for a while and turn off their microphone. But the fact they can't handle this is endemic, that it runs down the scale. They can't handle decisions of another level and another level down, and we give them a pass on that. And now we're left with a vacuum, and Aaron Rodgers walks into it as the media star, and the media has its agenda. And again, I don't know. I was just thinking about this. Sorry, that there's got to be a better way, and there've got to be ways to set policy that in the past we didn't struggle as much.
Well, John, I agree to some extent, but I also disagree in that I am so tired of the politicization of this whole pandemic and vaccines and processes and treatments and everything that's gone with it. And I listened to Rand Paul just flat out lie. And
he's a physician.
Well, I was going to say, and he uses his MD degree, not I'm a senator, but his MD degree as something that he's knowledgeable. And he has no clue. He's flat out lying, and he's debating, yelling at Dr. Fauci, who has so much more knowledge and experience in this particular field. Rand Paul's an ophthalmologist who probably hasn't treated a patient in 20 years,
right?
But has never treated a COVID patient, never. And not all MDs are knowledgeable in COVID. We need to get people, yes, our policies should be from our government, and they should be related to the science and listening to the scientists, but they don't do it. Everything is political. And, we were going to talk a little bit about the Rand Paul and Dr. Fauci and the falsification and the Wuhan whole debacle, their research cover-up that you suggested. And I'll be honest, when they talk about the gain of function, I'm not even sure what that is. And I know the public doesn't understand it. So, the whole idea of giving this to our politicians at this point in time is worthless, because they are worthless.
They're doing what they can. I mean, Rand Paul, listen, I don't really understand gain of function research. I'm an infectious diseases expert. I can promise you this: gain of function research has been done on lots of things that did not result in a pandemic. But Rand Paul found it as a lightning rod. And then he kind of went after Fauci after it. And Fauci didn't answer the question. I mean, they're all looking for sound bites. Ted Cruz this week attacked Big Bird.
Yes.
This man went to Stanford and Harvard, and he's attacking Big Bird. These people are looking for whatever they can to put themselves on Twitter and get themselves in front of the people who are going to support them in the base. So that's why I worry a little bit about any sort of solid discourse. That being said, I would almost go back to say, I wish there was a little bit more consensus building, even amongst those groups that we trust in this. John, like you were talking about, having those bodies sit down and debate that stuff. I mean, I think there should be more of that, even on a scientific level. Maybe at the CDC, that maybe should be a little bit more transparent exactly how they're coming up with some of the recommendations they're coming up with. I've appreciated very much that the FDA things have been online. I mean, I sit in my clinic and I kind of pull them up, and there's a Zoom meeting, or whatever, some sort of virtual meeting where they sit down and they give their presentations and they talk about it. And I really appreciate that. I understand that more than most of the population because it's pretty sciencey stuff. But having debates is important among people who are willing to come to a solution. But if you're just going to put a bunch of people in the room, listen, me and Aaron Rodgers are not going to have a very civil conversation right now if we're in the same room. And I don't think we're going to come up with much of a solution. So I think putting people who are in the same room who aren't interested in coming up with a solution is not going to get us anywhere, except maybe further down the rabbit hole.
But maybe what we're looking for is, and I agree probably that I'll retract my counterfactual. The politicians will just grandstand it because they're being fed by the media that wants to see that, and they aren't being held accountable. That, even though their lives in the balance, nobody's sort of addressing that their shenanigans are going to cost lives. Exactly. Even the interesting stuff out of the New York seems to have fallen away with the nursing homes and the returning people. And, I don't think that's a witch hunt, but it's a chance to, I don't think anybody should go after Cuomo particularly for that. But I do think it's an understanding for the next time around that we better learn our lessons from that and have some transparency in the follow-up. But maybe we, again, just go counterfactual. Wouldn't it be great to see, a weekly national telecast? Although we could volunteer, I suppose, to serve as the panel. But what if you had point counterpoint? Where it wasn't screaming heads, where for the purpose of educating us, there's a particular topic, whether it's antivirals or boosters, or let's bring in some folks who can have an articulate conversation and take the public away from Aaron Rodgers, who cares. Sorry, I Green Bay fans out there, he's just another individual who happens to be really talented at a sport, but he has no right to be injected into this conversation any more than anybody else does. When it comes, he doesn't have the knowledge, but by virtue of his celebrity, he fills the vacuum. Let's work against the vacuum. Let's create some sort of entertainment vehicle that gets attention. Or if it's not going to be our politicians, and it's certainly not the CDC and the scientists, we've talked about that at length on this show, but what's the vehicle? And point counterpoint, civil debate does have, done with some entertainment. I'm not saying pull out the, Ross Perot graph and, spend their time looking at the, somebody's homemade version of data. But there are voices that could make for a very interesting and informative and deep dive over time, a really deep dive into understanding some of this. And we're not being fed any of that. And I think the audience is out there. Increasingly, you're never going to get, a 20% market share anyway. So somebody should be out chasing the 3-4% market share that this would, I think it would bring up. But again, I'm too much wishful thinking over here. Let's get on to, policy outrage.
One of the things that's lacking, and it's one word, it's called integrity.
I agree.
And we just don't see that. Mm-hmm. So without that, none of this is going to work.
Would we even notice it if we saw it anymore?
Gosh, that's a great question.
Some of us still remember what it was.
But a lot of times integrity comes with the audience being forgiving, right? An honest mistake is part of integrity, or judging somebody to be reliable and trustworthy. You also have to give them the benefit of the doubt occasionally that they, if they said something wrong, it was all good intentions and with the best possible data. And I don't think we're at a point where we even know what that looks like anymore. But,
Yeah, it's a sad commentary. Mm-hmm. So let's move to something that may be getting better in this country. And that's, we've not talked at all on this show, the press, about home testing. Other countries are doing home tests. The United Kingdom, it's free. They do it every week. Some do it every day. And throughout the world, there are countries that have encouraged it and do very well with it. The United States is not one of those countries. We've spent a fortune on vaccines and a fortune on treating the ill. I saw a statistic. We've now lost over 750,000 Americans due to COVID. Just unbelievable numbers that we, a year and a half ago would never have imagined. Now they're talking about spending $1 billion on getting home tests, rapid home tests. But the history has been that they haven't been very accurate. So what do you all think about this new policy that they're going to push home tests? Do you think they're going to be better? Do you think it's going to be worthwhile? I mean, it's a nice thought. What's the reality?
I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze on something like that. I mean, again, like John made the excellent point earlier, focusing on boosters pushes away from the primary goal, which is vaccinating people first time around. We still have not gotten very good at messaging that. And people, I think it'll be worse in America than anywhere else. People here just love their tests. I had a test. I had a test that showed I had an antibody level. Well, I don't know what that means. I had a test that showed I was negative for COVID. Well, maybe you were, maybe you weren't. I don't know. If you have a cough and a fever, I still don't want you coming to work. I mean, I think that people really tend to put too much stock in these things. We need to focus back on what works and not what doesn't. Now, do I think that testing frequently has a place? Yeah, I do. I think it had a lot more of a role before we had a vaccine than now that we do. We were looking very strongly at those strategies. In some of the OSHA stuff that has now been, challenged in the courts and everything, that was, I think, part of it was, whether or not you're supposed to weekly test people who weren't getting vaccinated, whether they had an exemption or not, whether or not they were going to be tested. Well, I don't know how much that will help. It might help a little bit. But again, no test is 100% ever in the history of medicine. And some of them are way less than that. So I think that, just a testing alone to try and control the pandemic, it's another tool in the toolbox. But I'd say I'm not sure that gets us any closer to where we need to be.
Well, I guess I would look at it's going to be a challenge. The sensitivity and specificity of a test are one of the prime. We have to find one that picks up true positives and doesn't give you a lot of false positives. Finding that test is difficult. Finding that test that the average consumer can do the sample collection and whatever processing steps, presumably not many, are involved with the application of the swab to the right part of the test. It's got to be very simple. But I would argue that we should be investing in promising technologies, beg, borrowing, and stealing from whatever country seems to be doing a good job with it, because it does offer some information to people who will otherwise stay away from the doctor. They may never get their antivirals if that becomes a big agent and a way to deflect some of the worst hospitalizations and outcomes here. I would hope that I don't think we should go all in on it. Absolutely not, because right now I would suspect that we don't have a good enough test, and that the kind of confusion it'll generate, it'll take as many people away from care because they got a false negative as it would bring people to care because that sniffle turned out to be something more significant, and maybe they can protect their loved ones and kind of self-isolate and do some of the right things from an epidemiologic point of view. But I do think we should be aggressively investigating, because it is not new, but it's a different tool in the toolkit that seems like it's underdeveloped at this point for us, underutilized. You don't see ads running every 30 minutes on the sports channels. So clearly we haven't marketed it to its fullest potential. So
that's coming. I mean, one thing you got to remember about tests. The tests are only as good, really, as the prevalence of disease in a certain community. So I'm going to test in one place that, sensitivity and specificity are qualities of an individual test, but negative predictive value and positive predictive value also matter about the milieu in which you're using it. Right. So in a high density, the negative predictive value is going to be a lot worse, whereas in in a low density situation, it's going to be a lot better. So, I mean, there's lots of nuances to those tests that a lot of people don't understand, including many of the people that order them.
We could do a whole show on predictive value, buddy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's And that's shoe leather epidemiologic type stuff there that I think a lot of people just don't understand, and but it's important for us to understand it and be able, and that's how we use it to advise our patients whether or not testing is right for them, or whether or not we're going to order tests. Right? What's the first thing you learn in med school? Don't ever order a test unless you know what you're going to do with the result. Right?
Absolutely.
So that still is true.
We don't learn that in pathology. This way. No, I'm kidding.
Encourage more testing. I get it, John.
I think you bring up a really, really important point, though. When we get testing, the framework of risk, if you're in a high-risk situation, testing probably makes more sense. And maybe if you're in a high-consequence risk group with comorbidities, the algorithms may be a little bit different because the risk of a false negative, the consequences are higher. But that kind of sophistication about what the future of this pandemic looks like, we're not talking about that kind of narrative right now, which is we're 2 years into this. Well, 1 3/4 year into this pandemic. And our level of being able to talk about what you just brought up is a fascinating approach to testing. We're not even talking, we're talking about vaccines, and that's got its own algorithms that we should be exploring. Potentially antivirals are a subset of therapy that needs to be explored. But even testing, heaven help us. We're going to try and one size fits all kind of answer here at some point. And again, for testing, it's going to have consequences. You're going to have too many false positives among low prevalence groups, low risk groups, and you're going to probably have too many false negatives amongst high risk groups because they didn't think it was for them. And we missed the opportunity. I guess it wouldn't be false negatives. It would be untested false,
right.
Whatever that.
Right.
Maybe we need a new term for that group, under accessed testing.
Well, it's a mess, and we keep hopscotching all over, from testing to vaccines to boosters to children to adults. I mean, there is no depth to any of the discussion that's going on, and hopefully that's some of what we bring out in this show, is some of the lack of depth and some of the things that could be talked about on a national scene. And I volunteer John to be on this pro and con debate nationally. So, just for that. I want to take a break at this point and see if Scott has any questions that we need to answer, because we're getting short.
Yep. All right. Here's the question of the evening. I think that was a very upfront, and I'll throw it up on the screen here. Regina is asking, would you clarify the Moderna booster, full or half dose? So much confusion.
Half.
Yeah, it's a half dose from if you get the Moderna, and Pfizer people can get it, Moderna people can get it, J&J people can get it, so you can mix and match. But if you get the Moderna, it's half dose. Side effects seem to be similar to what the second shot side effects were, sore arm and all the same side effects. The delay in the Moderna that we were talking about are in the teenagers, the 12 to 17-year-olds. That's where the FDA has delayed giving any kind of decision on the Moderna vaccine.
All right. Also, a couple of other things that we should point out here. So for those who watch it on Facebook, we've hit some milestones here recently. Bryn Sears Johnston, you guys know, is an anniversary follower. So she's been following us for over a year. All right. Julie Lovegrove, she's a top fan, earned top fan status on Facebook. And Larry Schleif, top fan status. He's talking about some of these people believe they're above the law. And Julie's talking about how if you attack Big Bird, they won't listen to a person. So, so our folks that have been watching for a year and our top fans, we really, really do appreciate that. That's everything, Dr. Bookman.
Okay. Well, at this point, the last thing that I want to talk about, and I think Dr. Armitage actually sent this out, so I'm going to throw it to you, even though it's a little bit in my area. But the Hepatitis B vaccine, let's get away from COVID for a moment. 2 weeks ago when I was on, we talked about some new recommendations. Well, the CDC has now come out with a recommendation for the hepatitis B vaccine. John, do you want to talk about it? Did you see the actual recommendations?
I only saw the abstract of the recommendations, but I've been tracking the story with enough background to know that it's pretty exciting that we're starting to get into a more. It's less acute kind of patching. Some of these immunizations. This is a broader immunization kind of not mandate, but recommendation. For hepatitis C, it was very constrained in terms of its treatments. You kind of went from the narrow view to the broader. Okay, how can we increase the number of people who have access to the treatment for hepatitis C? This, to me, is that broadening of the therapeutic potential that used to be kind of specialty. When you say you can speak about it, I'll definitely throw it back to you for an expert opinion. But it's exciting to see us push beyond the patient's population or the affected population, or maybe selected risk groups for immunization into a broader protective. I mean, it's starting to look more like what we should be talking about vaccines for, which is broad spectrum protection of cost-effective devices, therapies, vaccines.
You're absolutely right.
I mean, Larry, hepatitis B vaccine is one of the most effective vaccines we've ever made, right? I mean, it makes COVID vaccine look ineffective. It is hepatitis B and hepatitis A are among the greatest public health victories of all time. And hepatitis B. So hepatitis A, I'll give you a little background. Hepatitis A, Oklahoma used to lead the country in hepatitis A cases, and then we started vaccinating kids in '93. Larry, does that sound right?
91.
91
yeah. for B at least.
Okay.
K was right there.
Yeah, so 91 was when we started vaccinating the babies, because now when your baby is born, they get a shot of hepatitis B before they leave the hospital, get their primary series by the time they're 6 months. Hepatitis A, they were doing in kindergarten, I think, or something like that. I don't think that's given to babies. But Oklahoma used to lead the country in that. Now we're one of the lowest ones. I haven't seen a case of acute hepatitis A in years. I mean, I treated probably 5 cases of acute hepatitis B. But what they're saying is we've stalled. We're now we've made some great inroads against hepatitis B. Now we're kind of stalled. Where is that susceptible cohort? It's like John was talking about earlier. Where's the sweet spot for vaccines? That's where the science is important, right? We have to start finding those sweet spots for who we really need to target. And the CDC is clearly targeted people 30 to 60 years old that need to be getting the hepatitis B vaccine. Now, hepatitis B is not super easily acquired, but it is one of the more infectious agents that we know. If you are exposed to hepatitis B, there is a 99% chance, if you have the appropriate exposure, you're going to get it. It's not even that high for COVID. So they're just, I think, trying to find the sweet spot for where exactly, or trying to make a bigger impact in the disease trajectory, which we've already done a pretty good job of. Hepatitis B isn't near as common as it used to be, but there's still some spots there where it circulates.
I was going to say the key is that for me is the CDC came out. I didn't even know they were looking at this. I haven't seen any publicity on it prior, and they've come up with this, and it really is to protect that 30 to 60 year old, because under 30, as you said, since 91, kids have been getting it. We know we've got lots of experience with it, but that 30 to 60 year old cohort is the susceptible. Mm-hmm. And this is, again, another vaccine that can literally stop in its tracks a very bad disease. If you've got hepatitis B, acute hepatitis B, you can be really sick, and it will go on to a chronic disease with cirrhosis and possibly liver failure or liver cancer.
One of the interesting aspects that I'd hate to, possibly end on a hand grenade here, but one of the risk populations is immigrant communities. And to me, I think, again, in being honest about what we need to do to target the best health for all folks who live in our country, addressing vaccinations in what tends to be a higher risk group, because not all the countries in the world enjoy the medical resources that we do. I think we would do ourselves a favor to talk honestly about immigration and vaccination, and maybe take some of the political grandstanding out of what's going on with COVID, vaccinations at the border, the southern border I'm talking about. But right now we have a very haphazard approach, and we can do better than that. And I think we'd send signals about consistency and thoughtfulness. And, hepatitis B is a great example of something that we have made tremendous. There's not a lot of controversy. Maybe I'm starting some, but there's not a lot of controversy around that. And we should grow from there, right? More populations getting recommendations, more populations getting immunization, and use that as a building block to bring more consensus to having policies that say anti-vaxxers are on the outs, because we're getting better and better outcomes, and vaccines are such a valuable tool. But even this recommendation gets buried in the COVID hoo-ha. We're talking about Aaron Rodgers and his, shaman. We're not talking about basic building blocks, which I think could be additive. The vaccine story around hepatitis B is amazing. The vaccine story around a whole ton of vaccines is amazing. Build on it. Develop momentum on stuff that we're more comfortable with, and then maybe the controversial stuff, gets a little better traction. I don't know.
Well, I agree, and this, I think, is a tremendous recommendation by the CDC. I was very proud and happy to see that. And I agree with David. I haven't seen an acute hepatitis B in a while, but in the 80s, when I started in practice, I used to see it all the time. And hepatitis A. I mean, I saw them both in acute disease. So
they're bad.
Yeah.
Really, really bad.
In the late 70s, when I first started doing GI, and we are the hepatologists, because there aren't a lot of true hepatologists. And I did a fellowship in hepatology.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yep.
I didn't know that.
I try to keep it secret.
I
Now that I'm retired, I can say
my
it.
liver referrals are going
So,
Was that with
guys-
Galen?
yeah.
in.
Yeah. I had hair back then. Okay, so it's 8:00. I want to thank everybody.
I want to get to one question real there. Chancey Duffy
okay.
asks, "Is the COVID safe?" Oh, yeah, there you go. Threw it up there. Yes, Chancey, mother of dogs. Even if you're having a dog, you should still get the COVID vaccine if you can. But no, there's not a lot of disagreement between doctors. American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology has strongly recommended it in pregnancy, and I would really put pregnant folks in one of the higher risk categories. So I hope if you are pregnant, I hope it goes well. Keep it safe by getting the COVID vaccine. If you're trying to get pregnant, there's no effect of COVID vaccination on fertility. So yeah, get your vaccination. Absolutely, good for you.
The other thing is,
Well, I was just going to say, and if there is discrepancy among doctors, you need to change the doctor.
Yeah, it's an ophthalmologist in Congress probably.
Yeah.
well, the other thing I would say is most deliveries occur in hospitals, and hospitals are probably one of the highest risk places for having the COVID virus floating around. Not that, I mean, there are many precautions taken, obviously, but again, you're probably going to be delivering in an environment that you'd probably rather go in protected than unprotected. That's a high risk moment for mom.
Your daughter's OB is wrong. I'm sorry, Chance.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
He just threw up another thing. Says my daughter's OB says absolutely not during first trimester. Your daughter's OB is wrong.
Is absolutely wrong. And I will say, from a personal standpoint, I've had two daughters who have delivered within the last 9 months. Both were vaccinated and in the first trimester and did well. So that OB is not up to date.
Is not practicing even what their own society says.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's been no document. I mean, there've been no results suggesting statistical downside, right?
None.
Complications or otherwise.
None.
And I would play the what if game. You know, if you go into the hospital and you pick up the infection, or your baby doesn't have the passive antibodies and somehow gets infected, you're going to have a lifetime of second guessing that decision. And I don't think you'll have any downside to taking the vaccine and protecting yourself. So play the game mentally, you know, what if?
Yeah.
Okay, one more note. Chancey's daughter's OB and Rand Paul have sent a message, curses foiled again. And so that's also CBS Sports has invited you guys on for the next game at Rodgers quarterback. So
I'm in. I am 100% in. I want to select the Bradshaw.
That may be next season.
yeah, Bradshaw's on the other network, but it'll all come together at some particular point. All right, thanks, Docs. Hopefully next week we'll have the well, we won't have the Fab Four next week. Dr. Bookman's going to be traveling, so
I'll be back though. I'll be back.
You will? All right.
Yeah, I come back late afternoon, so I'll be here.
Okay, you're not going to see the Bears while you're out of town, are you?
Not seeing the Bears. I'm going to see my grandson's first birthday.
Congratulations.
The Bears are getting smoked by the Steelers right now, for anybody who wants to know. They're getting
surprise.
They are not very good.
Okay, well, that's all of us. Wednesday night, we're going to be talking about the infrastructure bill on News Watch Oklahoma, and we'll see you again next week, 7 o'clock Monday night. Thank you, Dr. Bookman, Dr. Chansome, Dr. Armitage. Great discussion tonight. And thanks to our audience, all those folks that were sending messages in. We appreciate the audience and the folks who's sticking with us. We really appreciate that. So everybody have a great evening. Goodbye now.